Hello everyone, James Deverell here, the man behind the voice of Mr. Sinister. So, I'm finally back with some new content. I do apologise again for my absence. For those that missed my last video, I've been rather preoccupied with my very first audiobook, which has taken up a lot of my time these past few months. I'm going to leave a sample at the end of this video so you can check it out. This volume of paranormal stories only features one story. It is rather long and was originally released in several parts on Reddit. What I like about it, and one of the reasons I chose to narrate it, is that it has a conclusion. February 16th. My house dates to 1760, and so there isn't anything about it that can be considered normal. However, I have not, until now, had anything strange happen. It all started with a little door in our kitchen. The door is short and panelled, crude by today's standards. It hides a set of steps which lead to a space upstairs, a large open room which is currently unused. The door is often mistaken for an old cupboard, as it doesn't go all the way to the floor, but rather stops at the top of the first step. Beyond it, the blunt rises are very steep and narrow, and the room above the kitchen is rather dank with low ceilings and a wide planked creaky floor. This door, for as long as we've been in the house, was always ajar. There was a small wood block that you would twist in order to keep it closed, and no matter how many times I would tighten it, it always seemed to slip, allowing the door to open. We just kept closing it, over and over and over again, thinking it nothing more than another quirk. Recently, my wife, seeking to remedy the problem, came home with an antique black iron slide lock which I installed on the door. That's when it started. At 2:30 a.m., we were awoken by a banging sound coming from the kitchen. It was not a natural banging. It seemed intentional. The best way I can describe it is that it was like someone was repeatedly slamming a baking sheet on the table. I grabbed my baseball bat and, with great caution and with more than a little trepidation, went downstairs to the kitchen. I didn't know what to expect. What I found was nothing. Nothing was out of order. All of the doors and windows were closed and locked, including the small door to the stairs. This went on for several days. The banging, 2:30 a.m., like clockwork. Needless to say, we were frazzled. So I had my neighbour Fred, who knows everything about the house, come over to help me inspect anything that might be causing this slamming sound each night. We didn't find anything, and I could think of no source for the sound which I was certain came from the kitchen. My neighbour's wife, Mary, asked us to have a think about anything that might have changed around the time that the sound began. My wife and I looked at each other, and then back to Mary, and we told her about the lock. Mary, who was a true believer in spirits, suggested that we leave the door unlocked. This sounded very strange to us, but we did it anyway. There was no banging that night. So our new ritual was to release the lock on the door to the stairs before we go to bed, and that seemed to keep the peace. March 7th. It's been a week now, and all has been still. Yet every time I look at that door, I think about the unexplained noises and how curious it is to have something to do with the lock. I was never one to subscribe to such things as spirits, but no logical justification has been forthcoming to this point. I felt I should keep an open mind to the possibility. The old house is unique, not only for its age, but its beauty as well. The kitchen, where the disturbance seems to be centred, had been a summer kitchen originally. It was detached from the main house from 1760 until sometime in 1930s when it was joined. It's believed the two rooms upstairs, now one large room, were used as servants' quarters initially. I don't know much more than that specific to the space above the kitchen. I remain very intrigued by it, and so set out to learn what I could, and I've done some reading. My wife has wanted nothing to do with this. The experience has got her rather nervous, so I haven't done a great deal of investigating, and in fact have not locked the door in the kitchen overnight, which seems to be the trigger for these unseen tantrums. When she went off to visit with her sister, I picked up a recorder from Best Buy to see if I could capture the sound. There is no logical reason why I wouldn't be able to. The sounds are rather profound. I called my friend Dan to see if he would join me. The ever-pragmatic Dan found it all a bit silly, but being a good friend, he agreed. Before Dan arrived, I climbed the narrow steps off the kitchen and spent some time in the room above. I admit I was a bit anxious being up there. The space is unused, mainly because you can't get anything up the tiny staircase, which isn't much wider than a ladder. Once you open the door from the kitchen, it's one step up to a tiny landing, then a 90-degree turn to the right, and 15 steps up from there. As I paced about the room, I began to hear music. It wasn't specific at first, but it got a little clearer, and I recognized it as the song I've Never Been in Love Before. I shrugged it off as someone playing it on their stereo somewhere, although I'm some distance from any other house. Still, it was the best explanation I had at the time. But it repeated, as if it were on continuous play. It was faint, almost as if it were playing in my head. And maybe it was. It's just, I don't know that song other than to have heard the medley somewhere before. I looked it up a while later. It was published in 1950 for the Broadway play Guys and Dolls. It's said that it's supposed to be a duet, but what I heard was not. Also, I didn't hear any major orchestra behind it. It was pretty much just the singing. Interesting note, I didn't know the words to this song before. I definitely learned some of them while I was upstairs. After thinking about what I heard, I felt that I might be letting my imagination get away from me. I decided that I would keep this to myself. While I was surveying the room and thinking of possible uses for it, I thought it might be cool to put a man cave up there, perhaps with IKEA furniture that can be brought up and built in place. As I was laying it all out in my mind, I remembered why I was up there in the first place. Though unaccustomed to speaking to myself, I asked out loud, "Would you mind if I made this into a man cave?" In that instant, I heard the twinkle of wind chimes. For just a moment, it caused my imagination to leap even farther than before. We have wind chimes. They're on the back porch, just a few feet below where I was standing, so it wasn't like it was strange. I think what impressed me was the timing. It was a still night, and so they had been silent except for that moment. I know this doesn't mean anything. They're wind chimes. Chiming is what they do. But the timing felt interesting to me. Unrelated to any real evidence, while I was upstairs, I had a very strong impression of a young woman. I could see her, in my imagination, down to the house dress with black buttons over a white shirt. It was a clear image, and I wasn't sure why I was seeing it. I know nothing of this world, nor have I ever had any sort of experience before this, so I figured the impression I got was surely invented in my head. Later, when I was asked to describe what I saw, I said the best depiction I could give was that she was wearing a Dorothy dress like from The Wizard of Oz. That was the impression it gave me. That night, Dan and I set up the recorder and camped ourselves in the family room, which is clear sight of the kitchen. Hours passed without incident, and the two of us kept to our laptops for the most part, just listening and waiting. It was 3:45 when Dan looked up from his screen and asked me if I had a clock radio going off somewhere in the house. I told him no, and asked him why. He said, "I'm hearing music." "What are you hearing?" I asked him. "A song," he said, and then told me he had never heard it before, so he wasn't sure what it was. I asked him to sing it for me, which he refused to do. Instead, he spoke the words saying, "It's going, I thought my heart was safe, then something strange and strong, then something she's never been in love before." I was stunned. Show tunes are nowhere on Dan's radar, and there's no way he would invent this. At that moment, I was certain that I had heard it when I was upstairs. I thought it was just in my head, but now I knew it wasn't just me. Now Dan, of all people, heard the same thing. I actually didn't recall the lyrics strange and strong, but when I played it again, I confirmed that those words were indeed part of the lyrics. Dan didn't like it one bit, and he left shortly after. He's the first to call bullshit. He acknowledged to me that I hadn't played it for him, and he had never heard the song before. So how could it be the same song? I'm not sure he believes me, and I know he isn't happy with me, but this makes me even more certain that there is something going on here. I downloaded the soundtrack for Guys and Dolls, and I play it in the house now. If there is someone here, I want them to know I am listening. March 12th. I have worked at debunking these odd experiences over the past week. I spoke with Dan, and we discussed the music he heard. We agreed that it is not inconceivable that someone was playing a recording of that specific song somewhere. It seems far-fetched, but it can't be ruled out. There is a field along the south side of the house that runs along a subtle valley. Below that, at some distance, are a couple of houses. I have experienced firsthand how strangely sound can travel across the field. For example, I once heard parts of a conversation when the distance would have it seem impossible. So the song we heard may not be anything extraordinary. I had Fred over to go through the basement with me, specifically to look over the automatic sprinkler system. It occurred to me that that was the one thing which was on a timer, and given the regularity of the noises and the fact that the pipes can make inordinately loud noises, the automatic sprinkler system was immediately suspect. Yet when we traced the pipes, we could not duplicate the sound. Either way, I shut the system down completely. Another thing I considered was that we had mice under the porch last year, and eventually we spotted one in the kitchen. So we had an exterminator come out to get rid of them. He was an awesome guy, so I called him and told him that I was getting a lot of noise in the attic over the kitchen. I told him it was quite loud and that it wouldn't be a field mouse but something more. I also told him that I hadn't seen signs of rodents since his last visit. He explained that it wasn't unusual not to see them at first and assured me that mice and roof rats can make a lot of noise. He suggested that if I was concerned that they might be getting into the house, that I lay a line of flour across the entry of the kitchen, which is along the rear wall. He's been here several times. If I find tracks, I would know that I had mice in the house. So I did just that. The next morning, there were tracks, but they were odd, as if something had swept across the floor and then stopped. I wondered if it might be caused by an air vent. I wondered if it might be something more. Each night since this experience began, I have been awoken at around the same time. I can't say whether it's from the banging or not, as by the time I'm sitting up, the house is still. My wife doesn't wake anymore. I usually go down to the kitchen and sit at the table for a while, hoping that I might capture something. I keep the recorder going. March 16th. I was pulling into the driveway when I saw my neighbours, Fred and Mary. My driveway is an easement through their property, and I generally stop to chat whenever I see them outside. I couldn't have known it at that moment, but everything was about to change. All that I was trying to debunk or otherwise figure out has exploded. It's not a pest problem. It isn't someone playing a recording or the odd way the sound travels up our field. It is, without a doubt, a spirit. Fred was born in the house at the end of our driveway and, except for about a 10-year period, has lived there all his life. He's 81. I hadn't seen them in several days, and I hadn't told Fred about the music we heard. I also hadn't had the chance to tell him of the impression I got in my mind when I was in the upstairs room. When they asked me for an update, I told him about the music. I said that Dan and I both heard the song I've Never Been in Love Before playing somewhere. Fred had a physical reaction when I told him this. He literally drew back. His eyes welled up a bit, and he took hold of Mary, as if he was worried he might fall. He looked at his wife and nodded. "It's Ducey," he said. They invited me in, and for over an hour he explained to me everything he knew. Ducey was the nickname of Dorothy, who grew up in my house and would be about Fred's age, born in the 30s. The connection was immediate, and I went cold when he told me her name. When I was asked to describe the image I had when I was in the upstairs room, specifically about what she was wearing, I described her dress as a Dorothy dress from The Wizard of Oz. I now believe this image was given to me. I feel insane, but I can't think of another explanation. Fred told me that he and Mary had talked about the possibility of the experiences being related to Ducey, but chose not to bring it up to us. He said that so many years had passed, and without any other reports, they assumed, as Mary put it, that Ducey had crossed over. Ducey, or Dorothy, was a twin. Her twin's name was Deborah. There were 9 kids altogether that lived here then, and I knew this, except for their names, because Fred had told me this before. I also knew that the rooms upstairs had been used as bedrooms at one point, but I didn't know when. Fred told me that Deborah and Dorothy, being the only girls, were the only ones to have their own rooms. The room over the kitchen is 20 by 20, and when we bought the house, it was divided into 2 small rooms. We took the walls down because there had been a good deal of water damage, but there were definitely 2 rooms. There's more. The story, according to Fred, is that Dorothy was 18 or 19 when she got engaged. Fred didn't recall the name of the boy right then, but later emailed it to me, telling me his name was Armand. Fred said that he and Dorothy were childhood sweethearts, and that this boy was always around and that he became part of the family. Fred liked him very much. He said he was cunning and always making jokes. The boy was killed when attempting to repair a piece of equipment. Not sure exactly what. Fred said it was in the field, so perhaps a tractor. He became ensnared in the machine, and while the injury wouldn't normally have been life-threatening, because he was out in the field, he bled out before being discovered. Fred remembered the tragedy vividly. He told me that this boy had proposed to Dorothy only a couple of days before his death. He took her to the city for dinner and a show. This would have been around 1954 to 1955. When I was upstairs in that space, I heard the show tune in my head that was published for the play in 1950. It's no longer a coincidence. This is her. Nor do I doubt which show they saw because she told me. Fred explained that Dorothy became something of a shut-in after her fiancé's death. The house was always bustling with activity, and the only place where she could be alone was in her room, and that's where she stayed most of the time. The significance of the song is such that Fred told me that until this day he can't hear it without thinking of her. He told me she played it all the time. The family could do nothing to ease her grief. Fred explained that as her siblings left to start families of their own, Dorothy remained in the house with her mother and her elder brother, who he referred to as Mongoloid. He is 80, remember. She stayed in her room over the kitchen, even when the larger rooms became available. Fred told me that his father died in 1960. Dorothy, in a very rare outing, attended the services for Fred's father. He said she didn't say a word other than to offer condolences to his mother. Dorothy died of ovarian cancer in the front room of our house around 1966 or 67. Fred remembered that her brother said that before she passed, Dorothy asked to go to her room because it was there that felt most comfortable. Of course, given the configuration of the stairs and the care she required then, this was not possible. This news upset me more than I might have imagined it would. It's like a deep depression since learning about Dorothy. I suppose it has something to do with the idea that this was our home, but it clearly also belongs to someone else. Fred and Mary were both emotional as we shared what we knew. Fred explained that it's as if his dear friend is lost somewhere. "She doesn't deserve that," he said. We talked about what we could do about the situation. I was open to all ideas. Mary suggested that we hire a parapsychologist, and I was fine with that. No longer a skeptic, I want to see about helping this poor soul. March 24th. My wife found a medium. We'll call her Susan, and after trading emails, then several discussions on the phone, we invited her to the house. I was skeptical to say the least, but the woman travelled an hour to get to us and didn't charge us a dime. I was impressed by this, as the money didn't seem to play a factor at all in her desire to help. She made a connection right away, the moment she walked in the door. Only, it wasn't Dorothy. She said that she sensed 2 men. She called it a thumbprint and said that they weren't very receptive. She walked through the front room and into the family room. She said that the family room had been a very busy place at one time and asked about a specific wall, saying it wasn't as it used to be. The family room used to be the kitchen many years ago, before the house was joined with the summer kitchen. At that time, there was a large fireplace on the wall she was referring to. I only know this from pictures and from what Fred told me. He said the fireplace was collapsing, so it was taken down about 25 years ago. Susan then walked into the kitchen and said, "Her name is Lucy." It was close enough. She asked to go upstairs and seemed to know right where to go. This is interesting only because most people are surprised that there are steps behind the odd little door in the kitchen, but she seemed to know. The light wouldn't go on. I went up ahead of her because we've got some boxes at the top of the steps and I didn't want her to trip. I changed the bulb, but it still wouldn't go on. She asked to be left alone, and for a while, she was. When she returned to the kitchen, she said that Dorothy showed her her room. Susan described it as white wicker furniture and that the wallpaper was a pattern of huge flowers. The original walls are all gone now, redone in new sheetrock. They're painted flat white now, but when we removed the old walls upstairs about 5 years back, we discovered flowered wallpaper under the layers of paint. No way she could have known this, and so at this point, she had my complete attention. She said that Dorothy missed the church. She said, "It was off in that direction." She gestured toward the north. My wife and I couldn't recall a church in that direction. We told her that it was unlikely that there was ever a church within any reasonable distance north of the house, because nothing that way had ever been developed. It's always been farmland. She moved on, but this point would come up again. After Susan left, my wife and I sat in the kitchen, absorbing all we had learned. I looked up at one point to see my wife's eyes suddenly grow wide. She was looking past me, toward the north and the empty wall between the kitchen and the family room. We once had a large painting of the Reims Cathedral on that wall. We gave the painting to my sister-in-law as a housewarming gift because she always admired it. Apparently, Dorothy loved it too. It would seem that Dorothy is about 18 or 19, from what Susan could figure. We know that she was in her 30s when she died, but apparently, while she's here in the house at least, she is still a teenager. It feels to me that she's at a time in her life when Armand was still with her. I was pleased to learn that Dorothy likes me very much. My wife too, only she knows that my wife is nervous. She liked the music that I played, and she knew it was for her. She knows that her mother is dead, and that's why new people have come in and out of the house. Susan believes that Dorothy does not realize that she too has died. Susan has a very strong feeling that Dorothy is waiting for someone, and although we didn't tell her, she seemed to understand about Armand. She knew that she was waiting for her love. And after everything was said and done, we spoke about how to help Dorothy move on. Susan said that while she is amazingly receptive, that doesn't make it easier. We told her about Armand, and she said that it would be critical to see about reaching him. She spoke about trying to reach Dorothy's father and mother too. She explained that they would be the best way to help her move across. Susan will return to see if she can connect with Armand and/or Dorothy's family. Fred will join us then. I wanted Fred to be there on her first visit, but Susan said that Dorothy wouldn't know Fred now because he's an old man, but that he might be helpful later as we try to help her move on. Dorothy feels safe for now, which is good. She knows that she's home and that we're grateful to her for allowing us to share the space. April 1st. I continue to wake as usual at 2:30 a.m. I know that it's Dorothy who wakes me, though I don't know how. But I come down to the kitchen and I sit at the table. It feels like she's here with me. I sense she might be showing me things via images that flash in my head. It's common. We have all images flash in our minds when we are thinking about random things, but there are some images that seem placed. There is nothing extraordinary about them. For instance, one image that I saw was of a group of young people sitting on or standing beside a post and beam fence just talking and enjoying each other's company. Another was of a man who was repairing a car. At the same time, I'm remembering things from my own past, and in a way, I feel like she's in tune with that. I do feel sometimes that I may be off my nut, that perhaps I'm in the process of a complete psychotic break. Yet at the same time, it all seems so normal. Susan will be back in the next couple of days with the intention of trying to reach Dorothy's family. She feels strongly that this is the best way to approach her, that to deal with Dorothy directly on this matter may be too frightening for her. I like that Susan shares my concern that we not do anything to frighten her. After all, in Dorothy's world, we are the ghosts. April 5th. Last night was unusually cold. Susan returned to our house with a plan to reach out to Dorothy's mother and father to see about having them bring her over. She warned us that this is not an easy process. She said that we shouldn't expect the results to be immediate, that it may take several sessions to reach them, if we could reach them at all. It was the first time she would be wrong. For as much of a ride as this experience has been, I was hoping that there would be fireworks, that Dorothy would be connected and something incredible would happen. It wasn't like that at all. Susan actually didn't say much. She just sat there, deep in thought, while we all focused on the names of the people she was seeking. Dorothy's mother and father, George and Blanche. After a few minutes, Susan mentioned a man, and a moment later, she said that there were 2 men. What happened next may seem anticlimactic. Susan smiled and called it a rush. She said that there was an amazing moment of happiness and that Dorothy had crossed over, just like that. I didn't sense what Susan sensed, nor did I see or feel much of anything. I asked her to tell us everything. She said that she already had. She saw a man, and after a moment, another man was standing behind him. Dorothy went with them, and that's it. I asked who these men were. Susan said there were no names, that she couldn't be sure, as, although they briefly acknowledged her, they didn't speak to her. She assumed it to be George, Dorothy's father, and Armand, Dorothy's fiancé. I said, "But you are not certain?" She said no. I asked her if she was sure that Dorothy knew them. Susan couldn't say for certain, but her feeling was that she clearly did. I asked what Dorothy's reaction was. Susan said that she felt a rush of joy, and that it was as if someone turned on a spotlight and she could see nothing else. I asked how she knew that Dorothy had gone. Susan said there was no doubt, and assured me that she was completely happy. I asked about 1,000 more questions but never got the sense of completion I was hoping for. It felt so rushed and so final that I was left with an empty feeling. I wanted to say goodbye, or have some sense of my own that she was all right. I didn't get that. There were 5 of us in the room, and I was the only one who wasn't happy, though I tried not to let on. The connection, after all, was really between Dorothy and I, and so maybe it's more personal to me. I knew it was over, for what it's worth. I knew she was gone. That feeling I had that told me she was near was gone. April 6. Last night I was wrapping up my update to this story when I just quit and went to bed. I figured I would finish it today, hoping my mind would have settled and my update wouldn't be as negative. After the experience of yesterday, I just wanted the day to end. Right now, I'm incredibly grateful for what happened a few hours ago. I was upstairs working much of the day, but I wasn't myself. I don't know why my feelings were so strong. I guess in some strange way Dorothy had become a friend and I was overrun with worry. Who were these men? Why had she gone so quickly? I went downstairs to the kitchen, only rather than walking straight through the hall, I went through the dining room. It's a weird way around and frankly we never use the dining room, but that's the way my feet took me. Right away, I saw something curious on the table, like a smudge in the glass. I hit the light switch and took a step closer, and I realized that there was a little flower sitting on the table. I figured it was a silk flower from one of my wife's arrangements, so I went to pick it up, but as I reached for it, my fingers just slipped across the glass. I looked down again and saw the flower as clear as day, and once again, I went to pick it up. The flower seemed to be inside the glass. My brain can only function with logic, and so my next assumption was that it was a real flower and that it had blown from outside and was stuck to the bottom of the glass. I ducked under the table to pick it off, but when I looked up, there was nothing there. I stood again and looked down at the glass, and the flower was clear as day. My instinct for evidence gathering has sharpened since the beginning of this experience, so the first thing I did was to go through the kitchen and grab my cell phone. I came back to the dining room and snapped a picture of the flower, then another. By the time I took the second picture, the flower was gone. For a moment, I just stood there, sort of numb. Then, though I'm embarrassed to admit, I began to cry. I haven't cried since I was a child, but the emotion overwhelmed me. I knew that I had just been given a gift, and I knew that Dorothy was all right. What happened next was perhaps the most extraordinary part of this experience, although it didn't feel that way. It felt, once again, very normal to me. I sat in the kitchen drinking stale coffee for a while, letting my mind think about anything it wanted to think about. Images flashed through my memory, as they will do whenever we let our minds run free. But somewhere, in the middle of these beguiling thoughts, I began thinking about Perry and Todd. I knew Todd's name. Fred had mentioned him because of all the brothers in Dorothy's family. The two were friends. Perry was also Dorothy's brother, only I wasn't sure how I knew that. I don't recall ever having heard his name. I've learnt from this experience to no longer doubt that which is intangible. What my mind is thinking may not be simple thoughts, but given thoughts. In that moment, I knew that the thoughts I was having were being given to me. It wasn't her father who answered the calling, and it wasn't Armand. In my thoughts, somehow I knew it was Perry and Todd who came for their sister. And in that same moment, I was certain that they had been there for a while. These were indeed the two men that Susan sensed as soon as she stepped into the house for the very first time. I sent Fred an email asking if he could remember the names of each of the children in Dorothy's family. About an hour ago, I received a reply. To retain the family's privacy, I have changed the last name. Charles, you are taxing my old brain, but I do remember. Their last name, you know, was Smith. The names were George Jr., Skip, I think his real name was Samuel, Todd, Thomas, Barlett, who went by Bart, Daniel, Perry, Deborah, and Dorothy, a.k.a. Ducey. Armand's brother's name was Caleb Parks. I should have been shocked when I read the name Perry, but I wasn't. The flower was a gift from Dorothy, as was the concrete sureness of my thoughts about her brothers. She hadn't left me flat. She returned to answer my questions and to let me know she was all right. I'm sad that she's gone, but I'm also certain that I will see her again. There is something more after we are done here. There's something else, and that's where she is now, with her family and with Armand. And someday, we'll talk it over and share our stories of this old house and these days when our friendship began. I do hope that Dorothy will visit. We will always leave the door open for her. My wife created a picture that she is going to have made. It reads simply, "There is no place like home," and is signed in script, Dorothy. We'll hang on the door to her room, and for as long as we are in this house, it will always be Dorothy's room. Thank you for listening to and/or watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button. If you're new to my channel and want to keep up to date with my latest uploads, please go ahead and subscribe. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I have been absent due to working on my first audiobook. I do intend to keep uploading to this channel as frequently as I can, but due to the changes to advertising on YouTube, it is sadly not worthwhile for many horror channels to devote as much time to creating content as they used to. I'm not going to ask for donations to keep my channel going, but I wanted to branch out into other platforms whilst at the same time creating some content that you might be interested in purchasing. So, if you do like the sound of my voice, enjoy listening to me tell stories, and want to support me and the channel, check out my audiobook by clicking the links in the video description below. As promised, here is an excerpt from the audiobook. Her dismissive attitude was suddenly taken over by a sense of fear. No one else should be here, and she was certain she closed the door earlier. She picked up the phone from the side, and cautiously the teenager approached the door. She looked out into the night. The wind howled in her face and thunder gently rumbled in the distance. The back garden, however, was empty. With a sense of relief, Chloe slammed the door shut, this time taking care to turn the lock. Toby had been stood where he was called, watching the babysitter lock the door, when all of a sudden he began to bark wildly and growl. His large canines were shown in a display of aggression as he stared focused on the door. Bang, bang, bang. The door shook and rattled as someone started hammering it from the other side. Out of fright, Chloe jumped, dropping the phone, and ran behind the Labrador for protection. Bang, bang, bang. The sounds grew in volume as the blows increased with power. The door shook in its frame and threatened to burst from its hinges. Bang, bang, bang. Cracks began to appear down the body of the door, and the screws chimed as they bounced off the tiled floor. Chloe crouched to her knees and held her head in her hands. She began to panic as the door showed signs of yielding to the attacker. Any rational thought had been replaced by terror as she let out an ear-splitting scream. All of a sudden, the banging ceased. Toby stopped barking. Everything was still. Chloe needed to get help. Running out of the door was an option, but what if the attacker was there waiting for her? Her best option was to call someone. The police? Jim? It didn't matter. The phone lay at the foot of the back door where she had dropped it in fright. Unsure if the attacker might still be out there, she edged inch by inch to the damaged frame, daring not to breathe as if the door itself would notice her and come to life. Keeping as far away as she could, Chloe stretched out her hand, then, with a fast motion, grabbed the receiver. A doorbell rang and gave her a start. She realized it was the front door. Was it the attacker or a friend? Running to the front door, Chloe placed her eye on the spy hole and looked through. She smiled with relief to see a friendly face on the other side. Unbolting the door in a hurry, she raced to let her rescuer in. "Oh, Colin, it's so good to see—" Chloe lost the words to finish her sentence. As she opened the door, she saw Punch stood in front of her, holding Colin's decapitated head by the hair. Blood still dribbled from the crudely severed neck. The babysitter walked backwards, falling over her own feet, and landed heavily on the floor. Within an instant, Toby launched himself at the costume killer, but before he could land an attack, he was knocked to the floor, hit in midair by Punch's bat. Toby had no time to get to his paws, as Punch immediately set on him. Chloe watched, transfixed in horror, as Punch pulverized the poor animal to a bloody paste. "Well, well, well, if it isn't Pippa!" He turned to the girl. "You ruined my life!" "I'm not Pippa," Chloe protested. "Lies! I thought you would have grown out of them by now. He screamed as he swung his bat, his mind confused and clouded by bloodlust. Chloe dodged his weapon as it just missed her and crashed onto the kitchen surface. Her pathway to the front door was blocked, but if she could get through the already broken back door, she could escape. Sprinting on her heels, she ran to the back of the house. Punch gave chase and caught her ankle with his bat. She tripped and fell into the conservatory, crashing into shelves lined with tools and spilling their contents to the floor. Picking up a handful of nails that had fallen out of a box, she threw them at Punch. They bounced off him with little effect. "You've hurt me once already," he taunted. "You couldn't possibly do me any more damage, you little bitch." The phone began to ring in the kitchen. Chloe looked across to the receiver. She was cornered in the conservatory, and the only way to it was through Punch. He swung at the young girl and struck her, knocking her to the floor. "No one can save you now," he roared. He stood above the defenseless babysitter as blood streamed from a cut across her forehead. She was conscious, but dazed. He raised his bat above his head, ready to take his revenge, when the answer phone started up. That was an excerpt from Punch by J.R. Park, available on iTunes or for free with a trial subscription from Audible. Click on the links in the description to check it out. Once again, thanks for listening.